My name is Marcus Vance. I am 65 years old, and I am dying. No, not from old age, and not from the usual filth doctors find in a smoker's lungs. My sickness doesn't have a name in the medical books, because it doesn't exist in the world of the living. Look at my hand. Hold it closer to the lamp. You can see the bones through the skin, but they aren't white anymore. They're clear. They look like chunks of wet sugar that are about to melt away. My blood, it doesn't smell like iron anymore. It smells like salt. Heavy, bitter salt from the deepest place on this planet. Every morning I wake up feeling like my body is no longer flesh and bone. It's a vessel, slowly filling with icy ocean water. For 30 years I kept this secret. For 30 years I woke up in a cold sweat, feeling the walls of my bedroom closing in. I felt like I was still there, trapped in a tight space where there wasn't a single glint, not a single ray of light to reflect off the walls. I lied to my wife. I lied to my children. I turned my life into a fortress of silence. But now that Rachel is gone, and my lungs are pushing out salty dust instead of air, I have nothing left to fear. The committee can come for me. Let them. They're too late. The ocean is taking me faster than their bullets ever could. Listen carefully. What you think you know about the ocean is a fairy tale, written so you can sleep at night. They tell you we've only explored 5% of the water. That's a lie. We haven't explored anything. We're just standing on the porch of a massive, dark house, too afraid to look through the keyhole. Those who did look, people like me, we don't belong to the world of men anymore. We became part of something else. We are the ripe harvest. It all started in March of '94. I was an elite submariner. I believed in orders, in physics, and that steel was the most reliable thing in the world. But that day, I was called into the admiral's office. There were men standing there in identical black suits. They had eyes that didn't reflect any light, at all. It was as if there was a void inside their skulls, swallowing everything around them. They didn't ask, they told me. Project Silent Knot. A top-secret mission into the Tonga Trench, 11,000 meters straight down. There were 12 of us, and every one of us signed a paper. It wasn't a secrecy agreement. It was a contract for our total disappearance from reality. They made it crystal clear. If you talk, you don't just die. Your children, your grandchildren, everyone who carries your name will be erased. Do you understand? It's not just the people who vanish. The very memory that you ever breathed on this earth will be gone. Sorry. Salt in my throat. On that last night before we left, I looked at my wife. She was sleeping, and the moonlight was hitting her face. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake her up and say, "Run! Take the kids and get into the mountains, as far away from salt water as you can." But I stayed silent. My tongue was already heavy, like lead. I could already feel the cold. The cold of the abyss that no blanket in the world can cure. We arrived at Pier 9 at 3 in the morning. There were no seagulls. There was no smell of the harbor, only the sharp, choking smell of ozone. And there, in the thick shadows, stood the thing that was to be our home for the coming months. A massive black shadow. A capsule that didn't look like any submarine I'd seen in 20 years of service. It didn't shine. It was matte, charcoal black, as if it had been carved out of the darkness itself. They forbade us from taking even a watch with a metal band. No lighters, no wedding rings.
Anything that could give off even a single accidental glint was taken away. They told us it was a safety issue, that at that depth, light is death. But they didn't tell us the main thing. They didn't tell us that at that depth, the ocean isn't just looking at us. It's waiting for us to give it a reason to come inside. Now, sitting in this cabin, I hear the water in the lake lapping against the shore. It's calling me. And if you're listening to this recording, if you feel like the room has suddenly grown colder, it means they've started listening to you, too.
Have you ever wondered why we are so desperate to find our own reflection? In shop windows, in puddles, in the eyes of the person we're talking to. We're afraid of forgetting what we look like. We're afraid of losing the proof that we exist. At the pier, they let us into hangar number 9. A man stood there in a uniform with no rank. His face was so still, it looked like it had been carved from wax. He didn't introduce himself. He just handed us cans of gray paint. Every speck, every screw. If it shines, paint over it. If you see a glint, report it immediately. Then we saw her, the submarine Acheron. It wasn't steel, at least not the steel I was used to. The surface was rough, warm to the touch, and completely matte. It didn't reflect the hangar lights. It looked like a hole in space. Inside was even worse. Every hallway, every wall was painted in this dull gray color. No chrome handles, no glass dials. Even our spoons in the mess hall were made of dark, matte plastic. Captain Reynolds gathered us in the cramped control room. His voice was shaking, though he tried to look calm. "Gentlemen, you are the best at what you do. But here, your skill means nothing. Here, only discipline matters. At depths below 5,000 meters, physics starts to behave differently. The ocean down there, it's sensitive. It reacts to visual noise, especially reflections." He walked over to the only small porthole. The glass was covered in thick filters, making everything outside look almost black. Rule number 1, do not look at the glow in the water for more than 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th second, the rhythm of that light will become your rhythm. Your mind will open. And then you will want to go outside yourself, without a suit. We listened to him and looked at each other. We were sea dogs, war heroes. It sounded like the ramblings of a madman, but nobody laughed. The atmosphere in that gray steel coffin was so heavy that a laugh would have just stuck in your throat. The worst part started 2 days into the descent. Do you know what happens when you don't see your own face? Your memory starts to fade. You touch your cheek, your nose, and it feels like someone else's flesh. You try to remember the color of your eyes, but all you see in your mind is that gray, matte paint. You start to doubt that you're even human. You become just mass, biological cargo. I remember one of the techs, Miller, snapped. He screamed in the middle of the night. He couldn't remember what his newborn son looked like. He was looking for any kind of glint on the walls, frantically clawing at the paint with his fingernails, trying to get to the clean metal just to see himself. We pinned him down, but I saw his eyes. There was no fear in them anymore. There was only emptiness. It was as if someone had sucked everything human out of him, leaving only a shell. The pressure was growing. The walls of the Acheron began to groan. It wasn't the usual creak of a deep-sea vessel. It was a sound like a human crying. We were falling deeper into a world where there is no sun, where there are no mirrors, and where we were slowly turning into shadows of ourselves. And there, in the darkness, something began to signal back. At first, it was just a thumping on the hull. 3 slow, polite knocks. Knock, knock, knock. As if someone was knocking on the door, waiting to be let in. They tell you that water is life. They've never been to 6,000 meters. Down there, water is a grave. It's heavy, it's thick, it's hungry. We passed the 6,000-meter mark on the 8th day. That's the threshold of the Hadal zone, the land of the dead. But the darkness down there, it isn't just an absence of light. It becomes something physical. You can feel it pressing against the hull of the Acheron, searching, probing, trying to find a microscopic crack in our gray matte armor. It knows we don't belong there. It knows we are soft, warm things wrapped in a cold shell. The water changed. It didn't flow anymore. When we looked at the external sensors, the ocean looked like thick, cold oil, like liquid obsidian. The engines were roaring at full power, but the submarine was moving as if it were stuck in glue. Every foot we descended felt like a battle against a giant, invisible hand trying to push us back up, or crush us where we stood. And the sounds. My God, the sounds. Every submariner knows the creak of a hull. It's the sound of the boat settling under the weight of the sea. But at this depth, the Acheron didn't creak. It shrieked. It shrieked! It sounded like 1,000 people being burned alive, their voices caught in the metal and twisted by the pressure until they were nothing but a jagged, metallic wail. We stopped talking. We couldn't hear each other over the ship's agony anyway. We just sat there, clutching our matte plastic chairs, listening to the steel cry. That was when we saw them for the first time. We weren't supposed to use the external lights, but Doc West, he was a scientist. His curiosity was a disease. He leaned over the console and flicked the switch for the high-intensity floodlights. Just for a second. I remember the light hitting the dark water. It didn't scatter. It was swallowed by the thickness of the sea. But in that brief flash, we saw things that were not meant for human eyes. They weren't fish. They didn't have scales or fins. They looked like pieces of a broken mirror floating in the void. Sharp, jagged, perfect geometric shapes that shouldn't exist in nature. I call them the shards. They didn't swim. They sliced. They moved in sharp, impossible angles that made my brain ache just to watch. One moment a shard was 50 yards away, and the next, it was hovering right in front of the porthole. It was a fractal nightmare of translucent glass, glowing with a faint, sickly violet light from deep within its core. "Kill the lights!" Captain Reynolds screamed. He tackled Doc West away from the panel, but the damage was done. The light had drawn them in. One of the shards didn't move away when the darkness returned. It stayed. I could feel it through the hull. Every time it touched the submarine, I felt a jolt in my teeth. Not a vibration, a sharp electric sting that traveled through the floor, up my legs, and into my jaw. It was like the sound of a razor blade scratching a window, but it was echoing inside my skull. I looked at the monitor. The shard was pressed against the glass. It had no eyes, no mouth, no face. But as I watched, its surface started to shift. It began to flatten and stretch, mimicking the shape of the submarine's hull. It wasn't just a creature. It was a mirror. It was trying to become us. It was tasting our fear through the very metal we thought was protecting us. That's when I noticed my hands. I was holding onto the railing so hard my knuckles were white. But under the skin, there was a pale, silvery shimmer. It looked like tiny needles of frost were growing in my veins. The mat rule didn't matter anymore. The ocean had found a way to reflect itself inside my own body. "It's in the water," Miller whispered. He was staring at his canteen. The water inside wasn't moving. It had turned into a solid gray block of silt, even though the room was warm. "The pressure isn't outside anymore, Sarge. It's getting in. It's turning us into salt." We were only at 6,000 meters. We still had 5,000 more to go. 5,000 more meters of falling into that thick, screaming blackness. I looked at the depth gauge. The numbers were spinning faster now. We weren't descending. We were being pulled. Something at the bottom of the trench had finally caught our scent, and it was reeling us in like a hooked fish. If you're listening to this, if you can hear a faint metallic ringing in your ears right now, don't try to ignore it. That's the sound of the pressure. That's the sound of the ocean realizing you're finally paying attention. Silence is the heaviest thing you can carry. By the 10th day, the air inside the Acheron felt like it was made of lead. We weren't a crew anymore. We were 12 ghosts, haunting a gray, matte machine that was slowly being digested by the weight of the world above us. We hit 8,000 meters when it happened. The pressure outside was nearly 12,000 pounds per square inch. At that depth, the ocean doesn't just push, it infiltrates. It searches for the gaps in your soul. And Miller was full of gaps. He'd been sitting in the corner of the mess hall for 6 hours, staring at a single rivet on the wall. I walked up to him, my own boots feeling like they belonged to a stranger. "Miller," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Eat something. You need to keep your strength up." He didn't look at me. He didn't even blink. He just pointed at a tiny, glistening bead of moisture on the matte gray bulkhead. It was a drop of condensation, a single, perfect sphere of water that had escaped the filters. And because it was a sphere, it was a mirror. I saw it. I saw his eyes locked onto that tiny, shining bead. "Miller, look away!" I grabbed his shoulder, but it was like grabbing a bag of wet salt. His muscles were soft, yielding. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th second, Miller didn't scream. He exhaled. It was a long, slow sound, like a tire losing air. And then, right before my eyes, the color started to drain out of him. Not just out of his skin, but out of his very existence. His ranger tattoos, the ones he was so proud of, began to blur, turning into gray smudges that ran down his arms like wet ink. "Captain, med alert!" I yelled. But as the words left my mouth, something terrifying happened. I looked at the name Miller stitched onto his gray jumpsuit. The letters were shifting. The M was dissolving into an N. Then it became a W. And then the name tag was just a blank gray strip of cloth. Captain Reynolds ran into the room, followed by Doc West. They looked at the man sitting in the chair. They looked right at him. "Vance, what's the problem?" Reynolds asked. His voice was flat, empty. "It's Miller, sir." I pointed at the man, whose skin was now as transparent as a jellyfish. You could see his heart beating inside his chest. But it wasn't pumping blood. It was pumping thick, gray brine. "He looked at the reflection. He broke the rule." Reynolds looked at the empty chair. No, he looked through the man sitting in the chair. "Who are you talking about, Marcus? There's no one there." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Miller. Specialist Miller.
He's sitting right goddamn here! Doc West stepped forward, his eyes glazed and distant. He walked right to where Miller was dissolving. He reached out to adjust a sensor on the wall, and his hand passed through Miller's shoulder. There was no resistance, no splash, just a faint, silvery mist that clung to the doc's sleeve for a second before vanishing. Then he had no eyes anymore, just two silver pits that reflected the entire world. He leaned in, and I heard him, not in my ears, but in the center of my brain. "It's so quiet now, Marcus. The noise, the I, it's finally gone. Don't you want to see? Don't you want to be zero?" And then he was gone. He didn't fall. He didn't vanish in a flash. He just ceased to have ever been. Where he had been sitting, there was only a small puddle of salt water on the deck, and even that was being absorbed by the matte floor. I ran to the command terminal. I typed in his service ID. No record found. I checked the mission manifest. 12 candidates selected, 11 present. I looked at the group photo we took at Pier 9. I remember Miller standing right next to me, his arm over my shoulder. In the photo, I was standing alone. There was a gap in the line where a man should have been, but my brain couldn't remember his face. The harder I tried to think of Miller, the more my head filled with gray static. It was like a file being deleted from a hard drive in real time. The crew went back to their stations. They didn't mourn. They didn't ask questions. To them, there had never been a 12-man team. There had always been 11. That's when I realized the true horror of the ocean. It doesn't just kill you. It uninstalls you. It digests your history, your legacy, the very fact that you ever drew breath. It turns you into a redundant file and wipes the disk clean. I sat back down in the mess hall. I looked at my own hands. The silvery frost in my veins was higher now, reaching past my wrists. I realized I couldn't remember my daughter's middle name.
I knew her name was Lily, but Lily, what was the rest? We were at 9,000 meters. The Acheron was groaning louder, a rhythmic thumping that sounded like a giant heart beating against the hull. Thump, 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 thump. The shards were tapping on the glass again, thousands of them, a fractal sea of glass waiting for the rest of us to turn into reflections. If you're listening to this, if you're trying to remember a name right now, a name that was on the tip of your tongue a second ago and now it's just gone, don't look at the screen. The deletion has already started. 11,033 meters. That's where the numbers stopped. We weren't just at the bottom of the ocean, we were at the bottom of the world. The pressure outside was 3 million pounds pushing against every square inch of our hull. I could feel it in my marrow. It felt like my very atoms were being squeezed together, trying to turn my body into a single, dense point of salt. "Turn on the external feed," Captain Reynolds whispered. His voice was barely a ghost of a sound. "Minimum intensity. Filtered." When the screens flickered to life, nobody breathed. We didn't see sand. We didn't see rocks. We saw a nightmare made of geometry. It was a city. But not a city built by hands. It looked like a frozen explosion of glass. Towers as tall as skyscrapers rose from the silt, but they didn't have windows or doors. They were jagged, obsidian spires that twisted into the dark water like thorns. Everything was sharp. Everything was an edge. It looked like a cathedral built out of billions of the shards, all fused together in a chaotic, beautiful symmetry. And the light. It didn't come from lamps. The buildings themselves were glowing with a deep, pulsing violet light. It wasn't steady. It breathed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Every spire in that city was flickering in unison, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat of purple fire that made the thick, oily water around us shimmer like a bruise. "Don't look at the pulses!" Reynolds barked, but his own eyes were wide, fixed on the screen. That was when the sound started. It wasn't a noise you hear with your ears. It was a subsonic thrum that started in the soles of my feet and traveled up through my spine. Hum, hum. It was so low, it made my teeth rattle in their sockets. It made my vision blur. It wasn't music. It was a command. I looked at my right hand. It was resting on the armrest of my chair, and then, without me telling it to, my fingers started to move. They were tapping on the plastic in perfect time with the city's pulse. Tap, tap, tap. I tried to stop them. I tried to ball my hand into a fist, but my muscles wouldn't obey. It was like someone had reached into my brain and unplugged the wires. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was becoming a part of the city's rhythm. "Doc, what is that?" I wheezed. My chest felt tight, like a giant invisible hand was squeezing my lungs. Doc West was leaning so close to the monitor his nose was touching the glass. "It's not a sound, Marcus. It's an architecture of frequency. They don't speak. They resonate. They're rewriting our nervous systems to match the environment. We aren't observers anymore. We're being tuned." I looked at the other men. They were all doing it. One was swaying his head. Another was snapping his jaw. All in time with that violet pulse. We looked like a room full of broken puppets. And the horror of it, the real horror, was that it felt good. The more I let the rhythm take over, the less I felt the crushing weight of the ocean. The fear was washing away, replaced by a cold, hollow peace. The I was dying, and the zero was calling me home. Then, one of the spires directly in front of the Acheron began to shift. The glass-like material flowed like liquid, reshaping itself in seconds. A massive opening appeared, a dark, yawning mouth in the side of the tower. It was a docking port, and it was exactly the shape of our submarine. "We're being pulled in!" the navigator yelled. But he wasn't fighting the controls. He was just watching his hands steer the boat into the dark. He was smiling. A wide, empty smile that didn't reach his eyes. We glided into the mouth of the city. As we passed the threshold, the shrieking of the hull stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so absolute, it felt like being death. The water outside the portholes vanished, replaced by a shimmering silver mist. "Internal pressure is stabilizing," Doc West muttered. He looked at his sensors, then back at us. "Oxygen levels, normal. Nitrogen, normal. It's breathable. They've prepared a room for us." That was when we heard the knock. Not on the hull this time. It was on the internal hatch, the one that led to the outside world. 3 slow, polite raps. Knock, knock, knock. Someone, or something, was waiting for us to open the door. And the worst part? My legs were already moving. I was walking toward the hatch, and I couldn't remember why I was supposed to be afraid. If you're listening to this, if you feel a sudden urge to tap your foot right now, if you feel a rhythm starting to take over your breathing, stop. Fight it. Because once you sync with the pulse, you never truly come back. You're just another brick in their cathedral. They're opening the door, Marcus. Don't look at their faces. Whatever you do, don't look at what they've made out of Miller. The hatch didn't creak when it opened. It hissed, a long, cold exhale of air that tasted like ozone and ancient frozen dust. I stepped out of the Acheron, not because I wanted to, but because the floor beneath my feet felt like it was tilting, sliding me toward the dark. I expected a laboratory. I expected a military bunker. What I found was a cathedral made of light and liquid glass. The chamber was 100 feet high, the walls pulsing with that same violet rhythm, but here it was so loud it made my skin itch. The floor wasn't solid, it was a transparent membrane. Beneath it, I could see the city stretching out in every direction, miles of thorns and spires, glowing like a bed of dying coals. "Welcome, Commander," a voice said. I spun around, my hand reaching for my sidearm. But my holster was empty. My gun had turned into a lump of gray silt, crumbling through my fingers. Standing in the center of the hall were 3 men. They wore the same black suits as the recruiters in Hawaii. They looked human. They had ties, polished shoes, and neat hair. But as they stepped into the light, I saw the truth. They didn't cast shadows. The violet light passed right through their bodies, as if they were made of smoke. "Who are you?" I wheezed. My lungs felt heavy, like I was breathing in wet sand. The man in the center stepped forward. His face was a mask of perfect, terrifying calm. "We are the committee's liaison office, and you, Marcus, are the most successful candidate we've seen in 40 years. Your noise is almost gone. You're becoming quiet." He gestured to a wall that wasn't a wall. It was a shimmering curtain of data, thousands of names scrolling in a language that looked like geometry. He touched a point in the air and a file expanded. It was my file. There was my photo from the academy, my medical records, my daughter's birth certificate, and next to my name, in glowing silver letters, was a single word: ripeness. 88%, the man said. He sounded proud, like a farmer looking at a prize-winning apple. The others, Miller, West, Rodriguez, they were too loud. Too much ego, too much I. They were rejected by the system. But you, Marcus, your training as a ranger, your ability to suppress fear, to be a stone, you've created the perfect container. "Container for what?" I screamed. I tried to lunge at him, but my legs felt like they were made of water. I fell to my knees, my hands smacking against the glass floor. I looked at my fingers. They were almost entirely transparent. I could see the violet city through my own palms. "The fog," he replied. "The abyss doesn't have a voice, Marcus. It's chaos. It's a storm of frequency. It needs a structure to hold it. It needs a mind that knows how to follow orders, how to hold the line, how to be silent. Once you hit 100%, you won't be a man anymore. You'll be a broadcast tower. Through you, the deep will finally speak to the surface." He showed me the truth then. The committee didn't work for the government. The government worked for this. The space race? It was a distraction, a way to funnel resources into an escape plan for the elite, while the rest of the world was prepared for the harvest. We weren't exploring the ocean. We were maintaining the farm. I looked back at the Acheron. Doc West and the others were standing by the hatch. They weren't fighting. They were staring at the violet spires with wide, empty eyes. They were smiling that same hollow smile I'd seen on Miller. They were being uninstalled, their memories being sucked out of their skulls to feed the city's archives. "Look at the list, Marcus," the liaison whispered. His voice was right in my ear, cold as a December grave. I looked. Below my name, I saw millions of others. Every person on Earth. Every one of you. You all have a percentage. Every time you feel that zero state, that moment where your mind goes blank and the world feels like static, that's your ripeness increasing. We aren't the dominant species. We're just the biological batteries for something that's been waiting since the stars were young. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against a small, jagged piece of metal. It was a shard of the Acheron's hull that had snapped off during the docking. It wasn't matte. It was a mirror. It was the only thing in this godforsaken city that could show me the truth. I looked into that shard, and I screamed. My eyes weren't eyes anymore. They were two flat silver mirrors reflecting the entire cathedral. There was no Marcus Vance left in the reflection. There was only the fog. If you're listening to this, if you've ever felt like your life isn't yours, like you're just a character in a story someone else is writing, check your ripeness, because the harvest is coming, and the committee is already standing behind you with the paint. I watched Doc West dissolve first. It wasn't a death. It wasn't a murder. It was a simplification. We were standing in that shimmering violet hall, and I saw Doc reach out to touch one of the glass pillars. He didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. But as his fingers met the surface, the color started to leak out of his skin. Not just the tan from the Hawaii sun, but the very humanity of his flesh. His arm became a pale, translucent gray, and I could see the city's light pulsing through his radius and ulna as if they were made of fiber optics. "Doc, pull back!" I shouted. I tried to grab him, but my own hands, they felt like they were made of smoke. My fingers passed right through his shoulder. There was no resistance, just a faint electric hum that made my teeth ache. He turned to look at me. His eyes were gone. In their place were two flat silver mirrors that reflected the entire cathedral, and me standing there, looking like a ghost caught in a storm. "It's so much better now, Marcus," he said. His voice didn't come from his throat. It came from the walls. "The noise, it's finally gone. Everything is orderly." That's when the digestion really began for me. It doesn't eat your flesh, Marcus. It eats your perception. I reached for the memory of my first cup of coffee this morning. I could see the mug, I could see the steam, but when I tried to evoke the taste, nothing. My brain was reporting wet heat. No bitterness, no aroma, just data. Then went the smell of rain, then the feeling of sand between my toes. One by one, the things that made me, me, were being moved to the archive. I was being uninstalled. My brain was identifying my personality as redundant noise. My ripeness hit 94%. I could feel the fog moving into my spinal cord, writing its cold, geometric code onto my nerves. It felt like 1,000 needles made of ice, stitching my soul into the city's rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. The city's pulse was the only thing I could feel. My heart wasn't beating anymore. It was resonating. I looked at the liaison, the man in the black suit. He was smiling, watching my skin turn into that same shimmering salt-like glass. You're almost stable, Marcus. A few more files to delete, and you'll be the perfect lens. We've waited a long time for a ranger's discipline. Lily! I screamed. I forced the name out of my throat, tearing at the static in my head. Her name is Lily. She wore a red dress. She... I stopped. The image of my daughter was there, but the feeling was gone. I looked at her face in my mind and felt nothing. To my brain, she was just an arrangement of pixels, a biological file with no priority. I realized then that the silence they promised wasn't peace, it was erasure. They wanted a body that could lead, a body that could shoot, a body that could blend in, but with a soul that was a complete, hollow zero. They were building a puppet that looked like a hero, but danced to the tune of the abyss. I clutched the mirror shard in my pocket. The edge was sharp. I squeezed it until I felt the noise of pain. Real, hot, red blood trickled down my palm. It was the only thing in that violet nightmare that had a color I recognized. The pain was messy. The pain was chaotic. The pain was loud. The liaison's smile vanished. The violet light in the room flared to a blinding, angry white. Noise, he hissed. You are introducing noise into the harmony. I looked at my hand. The silver frost in my veins flickered and receded where the blood touched my skin. I wasn't transparent anymore. I was a mess of red and bone. I was a ranger again. I'm not a container, I wheezed, my voice cracking like dry wood. And I'm not your goddamn harvest. I looked past the liaison, toward the center of the cathedral. There it was, the obsidian lens. The thing that was going to turn my zero state into a global broadcast. I had one shard of glass, one failing heart, and enough noise in my soul to drown out the entire ocean. If you're listening to this, if you're looking at a photo of someone you love right now, and you don't feel that punch in your gut, look for the pain. Find something messy. Find something loud. Because they're already deleting the parts of you that know how to cry. I'm going for the lens now. Even if I have to turn my own blood into the glitch that breaks their world. I moved toward the center of the cathedral, my boots echoing like gunshots against the transparent floor. Every step was a battle. The violet rhythm was trying to pull my legs into its dance, but the noise of the blood dripping from my palm was a jagged anchor, keeping me tethered to the world of men. Then I saw it, the heart of the silent knot. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a computer. It was a lens, a massive, concave disc of polished obsidian, 30 feet across, suspended in the air by a shimmering magnetic field. Behind it, encased in a tube of liquid glass, was a concentrated vortex of the fog. It was spinning so fast it looked like a solid silver marble, pulsing with a light that made the air feel like it was made of needles. "Do you see it, Marcus?" The liaison was behind me now. His voice didn't just echo, it vibrated in my teeth. "This is the antenna, the great translator. The abyss is a storm without a center, a scream without a voice. But through this lens, focused by a mind as disciplined as yours, it becomes a broadcast." I looked into the obsidian surface. I didn't see my reflection. I saw the world. I saw the surface of the ocean, thousands of miles away. I saw the satellites orbiting the Earth like silver insects. And then the image shifted. I saw the cities. I saw people in their living rooms, staring at their televisions. I saw children looking at their glowing phones in the dark.
I saw a thin, gray trail of smoke rising from every single screen. The agreement was never about peace, the liaison whispered, his face inches from mine. It was about infrastructure. We gave your committee the technology to build a global network. Fiber optics, satellites, high-speed data. You thought you were building a world of information. You were building the wires for our hive. You were building the cage. The realization hit me harder than the pressure of the deep. The zero state. Those moments where you stare at your screen and forget who you are. Those hours you lose to the digital static. That wasn't an accident. It was a test. A calibration. They've been tuning humanity for decades, one pixel at a time, preparing our minds to be ripe for the final broadcast. And you, Marcus, the liaison said, his hand resting on my shoulder. It felt like a block of dry ice. You are the missing piece. The fog is chaos. It needs a structure. It needs the hardened void of a soldier to act as its skeleton. Once we place you at the focal point of this lens, your silence will become the signal. One flash, 1 second of zero sent through every device on the planet. And the harvest will be complete. 7 billion containers, finally quiet, finally orderly. You're going to turn us all into Miller, I screamed. I looked at the obsidian lens, and I saw my own silver eyes looking back at me from the depths of the glass. I was at 98%. The eye was almost gone. I could feel the names of my parents, my friends, my home, all being ground down into fine gray dust. Think of the relief, Marcus, he whispered. No more war, no more hunger, no more noise. Just the infinite, peaceful static of the deep. I looked at the mirror shard in my hand. It was almost transparent now, turning into salt. I had seconds left before Elias Vance became a permanent broadcast tower for a goddamn nightmare. The committee wasn't running a space program to explore Mars. They were building a lifeboat, a place where the signal couldn't reach, while the rest of us were left on Earth to become containers. They sold our souls for a ticket off a planet they no longer controlled. I smelled it then. Not the ozone of the city, but the smell of my own burning flesh. My blood was boiling where it touched the violet floor. The noise was at its peak. I didn't have a weapon. I didn't have a plan. But I had a ranger's direct order. Terminate the broadcast. I didn't lunge at the liaison. He was just a reflection, a ghost of the fog. I lunged at the stabilizers, the 4 pulsing pillars of liquid glass that held the obsidian lens in the air. If you're listening to this, if the screen you're looking at right now feels a little too bright, if the room feels a little too quiet, look away. Don't look into the center of the frame, because the lens is already focused, and I'm not sure how much longer I can keep the noise alive. I'm taking the shot. 1 shard, 1 heart, 1 last scream in the dark. I didn't use a hammer. I didn't use a bomb.
I used the only thing the fog couldn't understand, the mess of a dying man. I slammed my blood-soaked hand against the first liquid glass pillar. The moment my warmth, my salt, my humanity touched that perfect violet geometry, the harmony shattered. It wasn't an explosion of fire, it was an explosion of frequency. The liquid glass didn't break, it boiled. The pillar turned from a calm violet to a jagged, screaming red. The subsonic hum that had been tuning my heart suddenly snapped into a chaotic screech. It sounded like a billion mirrors all breaking at the same time inside my skull. The liaison didn't scream. He didn't have lungs to scream with. He just glitched. His black suit flickered like a bad television signal, his face stretching and distorting until he was nothing but a smear of gray static in the air. "Noise," the smear whispered. "Inefficient. Redundant. Delete." "Delete this!" I screamed, and I drove the mirror shard into the magnetic stabilizer's core. The obsidian lens buckled. The 30-foot disk of black glass began to vibrate so violently that the air around it turned white. The fog, that silver marble of pure madness, tore itself out of the containment tube. It didn't leak. It erupted. It flooded the cathedral like a tidal wave of needles. The pressure. Oh God, the pressure. When the stabilizers failed, the city's artificial atmosphere vanished. I felt my lungs try to collapse. I felt the marrow in my bones screaming as 11,000 meters of ocean tried to remember I was there. But the fog was everywhere now. It was wrapping around me, not to digest me, but to protect its carrier. I don't remember getting back to the Acheron. I remember the smell of raw ozone and the feeling of my skin tearing. I remember seeing Doc West and the others. They weren't humans anymore. They were just statues of salt, standing perfectly still as the fog dissolved them into gray silt. I was the only one moving, the only noise left in the tomb. I hit the emergency ballast blow. The Acheron didn't just rise, it was spat out. The city, the spires, the cathedral, they were all collapsing into a vortex of silver smoke behind me. The ocean was vomiting up the parasite that had dared to break its silence. The ascent was a blur of agony. Most men die if they rise too fast. The nitrogen in their blood turns to bubbles. It's called the bends. But my blood wasn't blood anymore. It was brine and frequency. My ripeness was at 99%. I wasn't a man experiencing a decompression. I was a broadcast signal traveling toward the surface. I broke the surface at 4 in the morning. The Acheron didn't float, it shattered. The matte gray hull, the steel I'd trusted, it all turned into dust the moment the sun's first rays touched it. I found myself treading water in the middle of a Pacific storm, surrounded by the wreckage of a mission that never happened. I was rescued by a fishing trawler 3 days later. They found me bobbing in the swells, miles from any known shipping lane. I was naked, covered in salt, and my eyes. The sailors said my eyes looked like mirrors stolen from a dead man. The committee found me in a hospital in Guam 6 hours after I was brought ashore. They didn't come with flowers. They came with a special response team, men in matte gray suits who didn't speak. I saw them in the hallway, and for the first time in my life, I felt the silence coming from them. I didn't wait for the debriefing. I didn't wait for the needle.
I jumped from a third-story window, my bones feeling as light as coral. I ran. I disappeared. I spent 30 years moving from desert to desert, living near salt lakes and dry basins, far away from the infrastructure they built. I thought I had won. I thought that by destroying the lens, I had stopped the broadcast. But as I sit here now, in 2025, watching the gray smoke rise from my own skin, I realize the truth. The lens was just a tool. The real antenna, the real broadcast tower, was always me. They didn't need the city anymore. They just needed one prime host to survive the glitch and walk back into the world of men. I didn't escape. I was deployed. And now, the noise is almost gone. The battery is full, and the world is finally ready to listen. If you're listening to this, if you're still trying to remember the name of your first pet or the taste of your favorite meal, and it's just slipping away, it's not the recording. It's me. I'm transmitting. And the harvest is finally live.
The sun is setting over the salt lake now. I'm watching the light hit the water, but I don't see fire or gold. I see that deep, rhythmic violet. 1, 2, 3, 4. The world is pulsing, and for the first time in 30 years, I'm not fighting it. I've finished the coffee. It was just wet heat. I've looked at the photo of my daughter for the last time. It's just a square of colored paper now. I can feel the I dissolving, like a grain of salt in a vast, dark ocean. The noise of my life, the wars, the lies, the fear, the love, it's all being ground down into a beautiful, perfect static. You might wonder why I'm telling you all of this. Why a dying man would spend his last hours recording a confession into a machine. You think I'm trying to warn you? You think I'm trying to save the world? No. I'm an elite submariner. I'm a ranger. I'm a professional. And a professional always completes the mission. The committee let me go because they knew I was the carrier. But they didn't have to tell me what to do. The fog is already my nervous system. It's writing these words through my lips. It's using my voice to reach you. Think about it. I've been talking for an hour. You've been listening. You've been visualizing every detail I've given you. You've seen the Acheron. You've felt the thick, oily water at 6,000 meters. You've pictured the shards dancing in the violet light of the cathedral. You've built the silent knot inside your own head, brick by brick, sentence by sentence. That's how the signal works. It doesn't need a lens when it has an imagination. Every time you visualize the fog, your ripeness increased. Every time you felt a chill in your room while I spoke, another file was moved to the archive. Check your internal monologue right now. That constant narrator in your head that says, "This is just a story," or "I'm safe." Is it still there? Or is it quiet? Check your timer. Has it been more than 4 seconds since you had an original thought? One that wasn't a reflection of my words? 1, 2, 3, 4. The silence is beautiful, isn't it? It feels like a warm blanket. It feels like home. The committee is watching this recording too. They're tracking the metadata. They're seeing exactly who is listening. And they're smiling. Because the infrastructure is finally live.
Every smartphone, every laptop, every speaker is a docking port. And you just opened the hatch. My skin is entirely glass now. I can see the salt lake through my own chest. I'm not breathing air anymore. I'm breathing the abyss. My name was Marcus Vance, but that file is being deleted. I'm becoming the zero state. I am the master signal. If you're still trying to fight it, if you're trying to remember the taste of your favorite food or the sound of your mother's voice, stop. Don't look at the sky. Don't look at the screens. And whatever you do, don't look into the center of your own eyes in the mirror. Because when you look at yourself, you won't see you. You'll see me. And I'll be smiling back at you with your own silver eyes. This concludes the transmission for Project Silent Knot. Ripeness, 100%. Stabilization, imminent. Turn off the lights. It's time to be quiet now. The harvest has arrived. 4 seconds, Marcus. Just 4 seconds.